Hey, I'm Brian Stelter, and this is Reliable Sources, our weekly look at the story behind the story, of how the media really works, how the news gets made, and how all of us can help make it better. This hour, brand new reporting on Jussie Smollett. We have brand new information from the Chicago PD I'll share with you in just a few minutes. Plus, meet the man who stopped an attack on the media at Trump's rally. And guess what? He's a big Trump supporter. And later this hour, new developments in the arrest of Maria Ressa, one of Time's People of the Year. She's out of jail now, and she'll join me live from Manila. But first, what does President Trump do when he loses? He changes the subject. And he's doing that again this weekend, re-upping his dangerous rhetoric, calling the media the enemy of the people just days after that attack at the rally in El Paso. He also went on to criticize Saturday Night Live and suggest there should be retribution. And I have no idea what that means, and I can't wait to get into that with our panel in a minute. But I think by any standard, by any measure, as you look at what's happened in the past few days with the border, with the budget wall compromise, with the president having this rambling Rose Garden speech, with him mixing it up with the press again, it has been a week of losses for the president. And there's a new loss this weekend. Heather Nauert, the Fox host turned State Department spokeswoman, withdrawing her name from consideration for UN ambassador. So there's a lot to discuss. And I'd like to bring in four people to talk through all of it. Here in New York with me, Philip Bump of the Washington Post, Caitlin Dickerson of the New York Times, CNN media analyst Bill Carter, and in Washington, Susan Hennessy of Lawfare, also a CNN analyst here. Let's go through all of the news and the distractions. Let's start with the news, then we'll talk about Trump's distractions. Philip, when you look at this week of a national emergency, what do we interpret? What is the president's media strategy?
I mean, his strategy is sort of par for the course, which is to keep appealing to his base. You know, I mean, I think that it was sort of striking to see on Friday when he was making ostensibly this announcement of a national emergency that he spent about 5-10 minutes beforehand making the case for his presidency broadly. Now, I was in Iowa when he came to the state fair in 2015, and I asked him, how are you going to work with Congress? How are you going to get things passed? And he said, you know, I just make deals. I make, the same way I got stuff passed from the zoning board in New York City, which was sort of on its face a ridiculous comment. But that was 2015. Didn't seem like he was going to be president. Now he is president. He sees that working with Congress is far harder than he may have thought if he gave it thought at that point in time. And what we saw this week was a loss in Congress, but he has to try and make that up to his base. And so he comes out of the gates and he says, look, we're winning on China, we're winning on trade, we're winning on the economy, and then sort of slides in later this national emergency. And most of his biggest supporters in the press, the Sean Hannitys, they are still with him thanks to this national emergency stuff. Right. Yeah, I mean, Hannity even flipped. Hannity came out of the gates saying that this shutdown deal was no good. We had reporting that Trump actually had called Hannity. The next thing you know, Hannity's on board. So we are seeing that this is something that it has consistently been a successful strategy for Trump. This appeal to emotion that he makes to his base, and that's what he did on Friday too. Alternate reality in force. So, Caitlin, you cover immigration for the Times. Drag us back to reality. What facts do you feel like need to be more front and center in this ongoing fight?
Well, for starters, what has always been true is that illegal immigration to the United States is down. It's been going down for several years. And so the need for this wall, it's incredibly hard to justify at this point. Even Border Patrol agents have said they don't need a wall. I talk to them often about what they like. They want more technology. They want more drones. They want more sensors underground. They don't want a physical wall. Another fact that I think people are forgetting is that a lot of people who are arriving at the border today, they're walking right up to immigration agents and they're asking for asylum. A wall does nothing to change that. And so while I think there's a way in which declaring this national emergency actually plays right into what President Trump's supporters love most about him, his reputation as a disruptor, at a certain point we are going to have to reckon as a country with the fact that there's really not a whole lot of need for a wall, and it's a huge expense that is hard to justify. I think it's really sad when the president denies his own government's data that you've been describing here so well. Let's go to one other topic, one other real news story before we go to the distractions, and that's for you, Susan. It's the news about Heather Nauert withdrawing her nomination. What is your impression of what happened here with Heather Nauert, a Fox News host who was going to become UN ambassador?
Yeah, so there was always sort of questions about Nauert being nominated in the first instance and whether or not she was really qualified. Now, I actually think she's done a pretty admirable job as sort of the State Department spokeswoman. That was a really difficult role. Not clear how that role would make her qualified for being the UN ambassador. In fact, she was so sort of transparently not qualified that I think some people even suspected that her nomination really was sort of an effort to kind of sideline the UN by this administration. That said, the reports now is that she's she's withdrawing herself from consideration because of an issue related to her nanny's visa, someone who reportedly was in the country legally but didn't have the proper work permit. You know, we've seen this happen before in this White House, this lack of vetting, sort of throwing a name out there for important positions to be confirmed by the Senate, and then later figuring out if these people can actually be confirmed. That said, it's really baffling trying to understand what this White House views as disqualifying and not, right? This is the White House that employed Steve Bannon, had past issues with racism or sexism, individuals with documented spousal abuse. All of that was fine, but suddenly this sort of nanny visa issue, that's a firm line for them.
Yeah, there must have been more. There must have been more that we don't know yet, but this apparently was one of the factors. From those stories, another loss for the president to the diversions now. Bill Carter, this SNL tweet. The president, I guess, didn't like Alec Baldwin on SNL last night. We can put them up side by side, show you the similarity. The president tweeted, "How do these networks get away with total Republican hit jobs without retribution? Likewise, for many other shows, it's very unfair and it should be looked into. This is the real collusion." Bill?
Well,
Bill, you've covered SNL for decades.
I mean, retribution, what does he mean? I mean, it brings back Nixon in a way. Like, I guess Nixon would have pulled their licenses. That's what he tried to do to NBC back in the day. But, right now, retribution sounds sort of like he's calling for some sort of action. And who's going to commit this action? His base? I mean...
And this is what he always does, right? He complains and then doesn't do anything about it.
And by the way,
he threatens NBC and doesn't do anything about it.
It also indicates he's watching. He must have watched that thing live.
Yeah,
and
look at him. It's quite a
similarity. He used to say, "I don't watch this stuff anymore. I don't pay attention." And the funny thing is, if you watch that whole bit, about 90% of it was just basically repeating what he actually did.
Right, just reading his
words. In the Rose Garden. The satire was only slightly a twist on the actual words that he said.
So given these losses this week that we've been talking about, the president has tried to change the subject. SNL is one example. Another example is this narrative on Fox News about an attempted coup against Trump. This is based on Andrew McCabe's new book and the idea that there was 25th Amendment talk happening in the Justice Department in 2017. Coup, all over Fox News. Watch.
Was this a coup?
An attempted coup, a coup d'etat.
A soft coup.
For lack of a better word, coup.
This is a low-energy coup. It's a coup attempt.
An open coup.
Essentially a coup.
There was essentially a coup.
So it's even reached some of the president's family members. Philip Bump, what are they talking about?
So essentially what they're saying is this report from Andrew McCabe's new book that there was, in fact, a conversation within the Justice Department shortly after the firing of James Comey to look at the 25th Amendment, which allows for the president to be removed from office under the case that either half of his cabinet agrees that he should be removed from office along with the vice president, or they established a congressional commission that looks at this thing. So this is, if you're talking about this as a coup, it is a coup that is necessitates the involvement of half of the people that Donald Trump appointed to the cabinet and Mike Pence coming on board and saying, yes, he should be removed from office.
Right.
If Rosenstein and McCabe can convince those people of doing that, it's hard to see that as a coup.
The point here, the broader point, is that there are people inside the government with concerns about the president's behavior and his stability. There's also spouses of White House aides concerned. Take a look at this from Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway. This is, of course, the husband of one of the president's top aides, saying on Twitter here that people should be seriously concerned about Trump's mental stability. I think we can put the tweet up on screen. He's reacting to this report. Trump came out and said Obama was about to start World War III. That's a lie. So Conway is saying we should highly question the mental stability of a president of the United States who would lie about something like that. Bill Carter, your reaction?
Well, Conway has really been outspoken. I mean, he obviously is not being restrained by the fact that his wife works for the president of the United States. And if he's saying that, you do have to wonder, is she supporting that? Does she contradict him at home? Or is she tacitly saying, yeah, this is a legitimate thing to say?
I think we can show what Kellyanne Conway has said about this in the past. She has made comments when reporters, when journalists bring up concerns about the president's mental health. Here's something that she said about that in the past.
There's no good comes out of people attacking the president's physical and mental states.
So I guess that's a conversation between husband and wife. But there is one other White House spouse I want to bring up, and that's Darla Shine. She is the wife of Bill Shine, the White House's top communications chief. And she's been tweeting, once again, these horrible things about vaccines. She's been posting anti-vaccination messages amid, of course, a measles outbreak in the United States. How concerning is this to you, Philip, that, Darla Shine, the wife of Bill Shine, continues to spread this material, this dangerous material?
I mean, it's sort of baffling, but I think we see this sort of action a lot from random people on social media.
Right, that's right. Random people share this stuff all the time.
Right, exactly.
Right.
It shows a lack of conscientiousness about the position she now holds. But I will point out one thread that runs through everything we've been talking about this morning, which you didn't just touch on. We started out talking about how Fox News is covering Donald Trump's announcement. We just talked about Fox News again. Bill Shine, former director at Fox News, like he was an executive at Fox News. There is a thread that we have this media institution which is more than willing to say what it is that Trump wants to hear. And I think that is problematic even more broadly than Darla Shine.
Right. And look, Caitlin, for example, you're above this fray. You try to stay out of the opinion of this. You're covering the news. But isn't it true that all of these people, whether it's the president himself or whether it's Darla Shine, they have access to the best possible information? The president has access, whether it's immigration or health, to the best information, but he doesn't always believe it.
It is true, and I think what you're seeing borne out is this precedent that starts right at the top with President Trump, which is that you can say what you feel, you can say what you think, you don't necessarily have to say what's true and what's borne out by evidence. And when you're seeing that from your boss or from your spouse's boss, then you feel empowered to do the same thing, because it's not just that it's accepted, it's that it's supported, it's a good idea, and people like it, and the president's supporters like it.
Tone starts from the top. Everybody, thank you very much. Bill, please stick around. Susan, please stick around. Quick break here, and then a brand new update from the Chicago PD on Jussie Smollett. Did he make it all up? An update now on Jussie Smollett, the actor who may have staged a hate crime in Chicago. There are reports in the last 24 hours that he may have orchestrated the assault that he said happened against him on the streets of Chicago a few weeks ago. The actor on Fox's Empire denies all of this, but the investigation is moving in that direction, moving in the direction of some sort of hoax. A spokesman for the Chicago PD tells me that as of this morning, they have not yet been able to speak with Smollett about these new allegations. Remember, it's those two men that were brought into custody who were questioned, who provided new evidence to the police. That is what spurred Chicago PD to reach back out to Smollett's lawyers on Friday night and say, we need to speak to you again as soon as possible. Well, here we are Sunday morning. The police still have not spoken with him again. He has lawyered up. It seems like there's a little bit of a standoff between Smollett and the police on this matter. But here's another important detail that just in from the Chicago PD, a spokesman telling me that as soon as this is all said and done, we are going to lay out every detail of this investigation. I think the police are trying to acknowledge there the frustration that a lot of people feel about this case, trying to say we are going to get to the bottom of it and explain all of it as soon as we can. But right now, they're waiting to hear back from Jussie Smollett. As you know, he was on Good Morning America a couple of days ago telling his side of the story. It was his first TV interview. He was speaking with Robin Roberts. He was once again claiming that two men accosted him. They described themselves as Trump supporters, said this is MAGA country, and tied a rope around his neck. But now that those claims are in question, now that many people are doubting his story, let's talk about it with Vox Media's Liz Plank, also the co-host of the Fifth Column podcast, Camille Foster, and CNN media analyst Bill Carter is back with me. Camille, what's your reaction to how this story has unfolded and evolved this weekend?
Well, I think there were a lot of reasons for skepticism from very, very early on here. If this had happened in the way that Jussie described, it would have been pretty extraordinary. And what we're seeing now, however, as the story starts to degrade a bit, is I do think a lot of sort of frustration on many sides and even some cheering on other sides, because there was a lot of a rush to judgment. I mean, I think a lot of these speculative, I think in a lot of these
This was a political fight, right?
Sure.
Immediately there were political stakes to this story. Liz, do you think that distorted it?
Right. I mean, the MAGA quote I remember reading about this story and looking for a real reputable media outlet reporting on that, and I could not find one, right? The people who were repeating that quote were not news outlets, were not media outlets. It was repeated by, sure, people who maybe had good intentions of wanting to spread this story and had empathy for what they thought was, you know, a real story. But we can't confuse celebrity tweets with the media and the press. And, you know...
So you're saying actors and activists who were rushing to his side because they're friends with him and they support him and they're concerned about a possible hate crime
of course, he's in the
are not the same as Chicago reporters who are trying to find out what happened.
Exactly, and it is different. And look, we don't know what happened to Jesse, but what we do know is that racism is alive and well in this country. Homophobia is alive and well in this country. 2017 set a record for the number of hate crimes, and the president and his rhetoric has been cited by people who, there is real evidence of people who have done these crimes who cite that the president has inspired them.
But is that why people just went ahead and
part of the problem
Yeah, because
here.
it's a trend.
Well, I think this is part of the problem. We're establishing the trend, whether or not it's
We're
there.
not establishing it. There's
Again,
evidence
when
of
you
it.
say things like it is alive and well, there is far less racism in America today than there ever has been.
There
is
been
far
an
less
increase in hate crimes against the LGBTQ community
homophobia
and against
Again,
Muslims.
when we talk about hate
against
crimes, we're
black
talking about 15% increases in these things. A hate crime is not the sort of thing that we simply look at and it is absolutely positively a hate crime. There's some supposition
so you don't
about
believe
that.
the FBI?
I'm
The
saying there's
FBI
some
is not an
supposition
expert? You're an
about,
expert?
There's some supposition about hate crime. Define hate crime. Define hate speech.
And that's why I leave it to the FBI.
And I'm suggesting
to
that
be
even in
experts on it.
FBI statistics, there's a great deal of ambiguity about what makes something a hate crime. There are
What
subjective
makes those
determinations
actually
there.
ambiguous is that most of them are not reported. So there's actually
what
more.
Smollett did, if he lied, he's hurt real victims of hate crimes.
No
Absolutely.
question.
We can agree on that.
No question.
I wonder, Bill, if you think the Good Morning America interview, for example, was too soft on him. I mean,
clearly.
Even by the time he sat down with Robin Roberts, there were a lot of doubts about his story.
And she had to press that, and she didn't really do it. Interestingly, he's a celebrity besides being a victim. He's an actor, and that was a celebrity interview more than a news person interview. And that's the way it felt like to me. Instead of getting to the facts, it was much more about him and his, the effects on him and things like that. Instead of saying, what really happened? It was not actually a news interview. So he didn't do a news interview. The media was not able to really question him closely about this. And when they did it, his story started to fall apart because it was full of red flags.
It also contributed to this sense among Trump supporters that there is this campaign against them, and that there is this, we can see it in Donald Trump Jr.'s tweets. I think we can put up some of his tweets from the past 12 hours. Look, Donald Trump Jr. is a hammer, so everything he sees is a nail, and everything he sees is about attacking the media. So he'll attack the media no matter what. But he's attacking the media today because he says that the press fell for this. And I just wonder how much of that we should acknowledge.
Well, at a minimum, there were people who, I've talked to people off camera, I've talked to people sort of in green rooms who were skeptical, who had questions about this story, were afraid to raise those concerns because of the intersectional nature of this particular accusation. And there are plenty of circumstances like that. And that is something that we have to be aware of. When there are stories that involve very sensitive issues of race and sexuality, and there are accusations and allegations that are being made, when you raise questions about those allegations, it is often the case that people will raise questions about your motivations. Look, I am talking about these stories. I'm talking about the merit of a particular charge. And at the end of the day, it's whether or not that charge has merit that matters. And Robin Robbins, in that conversation, in that interview, had an opportunity to say, there are practical reasons for someone to ask questions about something like this that have nothing to do with your race or your sexuality. She didn't do that, and there are far too many instances where serious journalists aren't doing that.
True.
And now Democratic politicians who came out and said this was a modern-day lynching are going to have to be held to account.
They jumped way too early on this, and there's where the real fault lies. I think you can't use your ideology and impose it on a story like this. You're going to get burned. Maybe you won't always get burned, but it's a tremendous risk.
As of a couple days ago, Fox, the studio that makes Empire and the network that broadcasts Empire, was standing by Smollett, saying that he has the network's support. As of this morning, no new comment from Fox. They've gone silent on this. Liz, last word to you on what is, at its heart, just a very sad case.
Yeah,
no matter what. If he lied, it's sad. If it happened, it's sad.
Absolutely. I think it's important to cover this story. I also think it's important to cover the other several stories of hate crimes. Not to say that this was a story of a hate crime, but that there are real hate crimes that happen in this country, and there's an increase in them against black people, against LGBTQ people, against Muslims. And the fact that one robbery was fake does not mean that robbery is not a problem. The fact that there is one false rape accusation does not mean that there's no rape. We have to cover these issues as trends and as patterns and not fall into the trap that because one story is not real, that the problem is not real.
Or maybe not give the celebrities all the attention.
Yes,
all right,
absolutely.
to our panel, thank you very much. After a quick break here, we're talking about Roger Stone. We're going to unpack his ridiculous lies about this network, plus Julia Ioffe and the view of the Mueller investigation from Moscow. All of that's coming up. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe says every day in the Trump presidency, quote, brings a new low, with the president exposing himself as a deliberate liar who will say whatever he pleases to get whatever he wants. That's a taste of how this book tour is going to go. His new book, The Threat, comes out on Tuesday. It's already number 3 on Amazon's bestsellers list. Keep in mind, there are questions about McCabe's credibility since he himself was fired for allegedly lying to government investigators. McCabe is on 60 Minutes and the Today Show in the coming days, all part of the growing industry of tell-all books about Trump world and Russiagate. GQ's Julia Ioffe joins me now from Moscow, and CNN national security and legal analyst Susan Hennessy is back with us in D.C. Julia, since you're there, I'm really curious about what Russians hear about the American probe into Russian interference. What did they hear about the Mueller probe?
It's a good question, but they hear pretty much nothing. When it comes to, for example, this explosive interview that Andrew McCabe gave and the excerpts and the reviews we're reading in the American press, it's hardly registering at all in Moscow or in the rest of Russia. And you have to understand that if the Russian government were to publicize it in any way, or any of the twists and turns of the Mueller investigation and the evidence and the indictments it's turned up so far, it would give credence and legitimacy to the American accusations that Russia helped elect our president. And even the Russians who are opposed to Vladimir Putin, who are able to access some of our news sources, they still, they acknowledge that there was some kind of interference, but they think that basically most Russians think we've all gone totally crazy and whipped ourselves up into a lather over nothing.
Interesting. Meanwhile, every week there are new developments. Susan, this week, a judge ruled that Paul Manafort intentionally lied to prosecutors. A judge slapped a gag order on Roger Stone. Stone has been going around claiming that CNN was tipped off to the raid on his home last month. He's out there saying it wherever he can. He's trying to raise money off of that lie. He's also said it in a new court filing where he's trying to get the judge to take that lie seriously. I suppose now that he's under this gag order, he can't go out there and say it anymore. But Susan, what do you think his motives are? Is it just about raising money for his legal defense fund? Is that why he's out there lying about CNN?
Yeah, so I think it's about sort of a general distraction technique here and attempting to paint himself as the victim here, right? Rather than than having people focus on the underlying substantive conduct and whether or not he was in communication with WikiLeaks, why, and more importantly, what information he might have shared with the president and his associates. This is sort of an effort to say this is the real story. This is the ways in which I've been victimized. It's important to note that Roger Stone himself is actually not gagged by this order. This order actually prevents Roger Stone's lawyers from making comments about the case. Roger Stone isn't able to give comments from the courthouse steps, but because there are really pretty substantial First Amendment issues whenever you do issue a gag order, the judge tried to sort of be really, really restrained here and essentially say, sort of direct to Roger Stone, hey, I'm trying to tell you for your own good, for your own sake, to not go out there and speak. But even under this order, if Roger Stone wants to go on Fox News and continue to spread conspiracy theories, this doesn't prevent him from doing that.
I see. Okay, so we may hear even more about this. Meantime, there's so much confusion, and we can see it in this new Washington Post poll. So much confusion about what Mueller's even found so far, what he's proven so far. Look at this, for example. Most Democrats think Mueller has proved that members of the Trump campaign lied about contacts with Russians. Obviously, they did lie about contacts with Russians, but most Republicans don't believe it. So, Julia, to the folks that say, what is taking so long? Why haven't we gotten to the bottom of this yet? And once Mueller does issue his report, people aren't going to believe it anyway. What do you say to those skeptics?
Well, I think, in some ways it really mirrors and dovetails with the Russian approach, which is show us the evidence. Well, not that evidence. Okay, show us evidence. Okay, that doesn't count either. Give us evidence. And then the more it comes out, the less it counts. And I think the president and people like Roger Stone, getting back to this conspiracy theory he's spreading about CNN, it's all about kind of undermining the very premise of the investigation, about who is doing the investigation. Donald Trump constantly saying Mueller and his 13 angry Democrats, so that when it does come out, you can say, well, that doesn't count, that doesn't count, that doesn't count. Therefore, the president and his people are cleared of it, even though they, in fact, are not.
It reminds me of that book about Russia titled Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. And I really hope that's not where we are in America. All right, Julia and Susan, thank you so much. Coming up here, the story you have not heard about this disturbance at Trump's rally the other day. Meet the man who intervened when the press was attacked. He's coming up next. Welcome back. By now, you've probably seen this video.
Lowest level in the history of our country.
This is the moment when a screaming man at Trump's rally in El Paso breached the press pen and shoved several camera operators. This is video from the BBC. But you've not heard the full story about this incident. A Trump supporter at the rally was the one who intervened, restraining the aggressor and muscling him off the media platform. You can see him here in this video, bringing the man out of the press pen, bringing him security. The man's name is Ben Bergquam. He's a conservative radio host and live streamer from California. He was covering the rally in Texas that day, and he's joining me live now. Ben, hats off to you. Without you, this bad situation would have been even worse. What did you see happen in the press pen?
Thanks, Brian. So I heard a noise first. I was up there filming, and I looked to my right. I heard a commotion, and I started seeing cameras falling down and people falling over. And I saw a guy running towards me, or tumbling towards me with a MAGA hat on. And so I just, at first, it took me a second to figure out what was going on. And then I realized he was the aggressor and something needed to stop him before he, did any more. So that was.
Why did you decide to be the one? Why did you decide to restrain him?
Well, so I agree with President Trump's sentiment that there is a lot of fake news out there. But what I told him, too, as I was taking him off the stage was it's not all fake news. I'm up here, for one, Frontline America and what we've got going on. We're up there. There's a lot of other important news outlets up there. And it just doesn't do any good. What he was doing just made President Trump look bad. It made all MAGA hat wearers look bad. So I was glad that I was actually there with the MAGA hat, with the Trump, as a Trump supporter, to be able to restrain him and tell him, hey, you idiot, stop doing this. You make us look stupid.
Yeah, and thankfully he was escorted out thanks to you, thanks to security. He was removed, and Trump did ask to make sure things were okay afterwards. Do you think that his enemy of the people rhetoric causes people to commit these kinds of acts of violence?
No, I don't. I think what President Trump calls fake news tends to be fake news. I think there is a growing concern in the public with what's coming out of the media, and President Trump is just tapping into that. I don't think President Trump has ever called for violence against the media, and I don't think he ever will, but people need to be held accountable to their words, especially in the media, especially with the protections that are given through the First Amendment. We have to be very careful with what we say, but I definitely
What do you mean we have to be careful with what we say? Isn't that's a contradiction of the First Amendment, isn't it?
Well, I should say we should be very careful with the accuracy of what we say. If we're intentionally using misleading things, you look at what's going on the last couple years of attacks on our president. Now, whether or not you like him or don't, there has been a lot of false information out there, and you could say on both sides. But no, I think he's right. I support President Trump, and I don't think that he has called for violence. I don't see him inciting violence. I just think there was one crazy person. I still don't know who the guy is. I still want to find out who the guy is that was wearing a Trump hat that still had the tag on it. I'm still concerned about that.
There were suggestions that he was a plant. It sounds like you might think he was.
I don't know. I always, until I have the evidence, I'm not going to say one way or the other. But what I did see was it was coordinated with the other demonstrations that were going on. The timing of it came right at the end. It was the most flamboyant, or had the biggest impact, and it tends to line up with the media narrative. And so if you were going to plant somebody, that would have been a great place to do it. But until we actually have evidence of that, I wouldn't say that.
Ben, I appreciate you being here, and I'm starting to wonder if we're going to need more security at these rallies. What do you think?
Yeah, that was probably the word. I mean, the takeaway from that was the fact that this guy could get up there so easily. I absolutely think we need to consider how we, how we barricade those areas off and make sure that everybody at the event is protected.
Yeah. Ben, thanks again for being here. I appreciate it. And I want to mention there was another physical altercation involving members of the media later in the week. This was in Washington. Police on Capitol Hill reportedly blocked and pushed reporters to keep them from interviewing senators during the big budget vote. A very unusual situation. There's usually really open press access on Capitol Hill. A witness told CQ Roll Call that it got really ugly and that he'd never seen it happen before. The Capitol Police say they were trying to ensure that senators were able to safely traverse the crowds in order to go and vote, but that doesn't add up based on what we've seen in the past. And so now a group representing Hill reporters is pursuing the matter, trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. Up next here, a turn to a much more serious violation. Maria Ressa's fight to stay out of jail while her government tries to shut her up. We will speak with her live in just a moment. For many years, Maria Ressa ran CNN's coverage in Manila, Philippines. Now she's the CEO and executive editor of the Philippine news website, The Rappler. There she was just a few months ago on the cover of Time magazine, one of the People of the Year, honoring her work supporting press freedom and demanding independent news coverage in the Philippines. But this week, she spent a night in jail, the result of a cyber libel charge for an old article on her website. This is the latest example of what she calls political harassment by the government of the Philippines. Maria is out of jail, at least for now, and she's joining me live from Manila. Maria, what happened the other day?
Agents of the National Bureau of Investigation, that's our version of the FBI, came to our office and issued an arrest warrant and demanded that I go with them to be processed, to be arrested. It was a shock.
They've been doing this for over a year, right? They've been doing various things to try to threaten you. You've been indicted. But was this the first time you'd actually been thrown in jail?
The first time, and for the most ludicrous charge. It's cyber libel, an article we published 7 years ago, before the actual law that we supposedly violated was even enacted. So they're applying a law retroactively. It's unconstitutional, and that's part of what's shocking about all of this. The lawyers of the National Bureau of Investigation threw this case out, did not recommend that it move forward, and yet miraculously a week later, there it was at the Department of Justice and an arrest warrant issued.
What do you believe is behind all of this harassment by the government?
I think it's definitely intimidation. For me to spend one night in detention, did they want me to feel the power of the state? I definitely feel it. In less than 2 months, I've had to post bail 6 times on ludicrous charges. But this one in particular is the worst. I came out of that night thinking, this is now a travesty of justice.
And when the president of the Philippines says, hey, I have nothing to do with this, do you believe that? Do you believe him?
I think you have to actions speak louder than words. This particular case was filed against me by a businessman, against me and Rappler and the people who actually wrote it and had something to do with it. All of our board of directors were included in a cyber libel case. That's unusual. And then in the end, the actual arrest warrant was issued to me. I was taken into detention. And yet, a day and a half later, the person who actually wrote it was able to post bail. Not that I would want him to go through what I went through. Again, it just shows you so many irregularities. The government seemed bent on making sure I spent the night and was processed as a criminal. Again, if they think that will scare me, all that does is it gives me firsthand experience of how far they will bend the law against perceived enemies.
And your website, everyone can go to it's Rappler.com. Of course, is covering the Philippines and the world in an independent way. Journalists around the world have been championing you, and they've been concerned about these attempts by the government to shut you up. What is your message to other journalists around the world who find themselves in similar situations where press freedoms are being rolled back?
you have to hold the line, because every time you allow the government to cross it, you erode your own powers. I think for me, it's about impunity. And the last time I was there with you, we talked about impunity of the government and the brutal killings that are happening in the Philippines, and as well impunity on social media. That is what enables a lot of these real world actions. So journalists are getting squashed between this on the ground, the online attacks on social media that's manipulating reality, and then authority coming down above them. We've got to fight it back.
We sure do. Maria, thank you. We will stay in touch and stay on top of your case. And speaking of Facebook,
Thanks so much.
Some fresh reporting about what the company is doing or not doing to combat misinformation. That's right after the break.
New day, tomorrow morning starting at 6 Eastern on CNN.
New reporting from CNN sheds light on a viral video company targeting millennials on Facebook that was backed by, wait for it, the Russian government. You can check this out. It's on CNN.com. The story is by Donny O'Sullivan and several of his colleagues, and Donny is here with me now. What did you all find?
So there's a group of Facebook pages that if you were to come across them on your Facebook newsfeed, they'd look like sort of any millennial startup that could be run from Brooklyn.
Yeah, lots of viral videos. We can put a couple of them up on screen to show you.
Yeah, so great viral videos, great design, you know, and the content was pretty critical of the U.S. government, of U.S. mainstream media, but nothing that would be totally out of the ordinary necessarily.
A lot of leftist arguments against, U.S. foreign policy, stuff like that?
Yeah, a lot of legitimate arguments. But as we started digging into it, we did find that the company, which set up these pages over the past 6 months and began employing people in Los Angeles out of a WeWork in Los Angeles, was actually backed by RT. 51% of it was owned by Russia Today. The other half was owned by a former RT presenter.
So why are they doing this? Why are the Russians spending money to try to create videos to get you and me to watch them? What's the motive?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a good way of pushing forward their narrative and getting, true viral videos into millions of people's Facebook feeds.
And make our politics even uglier and make us hate each other even more. Is that the idea?
Well, possibly. I think a lot of you watch these videos. A lot of the points are, they are making are points that will resonate with real Americans, but we know that that is what RT does. I guess what's interesting about this program was that we've seen the covert Russian trolls that have been indicted by Mueller in 2016.
Right.
We know of the overt, Russia, RT, Sputnik, etc. that's operating here in the U.S. These pages sort of were in a gray area, right?
Ah.
They were, they weren't necessarily really hiding their Russian
They
ties.
weren't really hiding, but they were kind of hiding?
Yeah, I mean, look, as much as I'd like to say we did a ton of digging on this, if you were to, start Googling these pages, you could quickly sort of work it back to see. But that obviously that's not how most people interact with content on Facebook.
Right, not at all. So when you all called for comment, when you called Facebook ended up suspending several of these pages. Did they violate a rule? Did Facebook say these pages violated a policy?
In short, no. And that's part of the problem as well. So these pages, they didn't say they were tied to Russia. They didn't say they were backed by RT. But there isn't a rule in place on Facebook to say that you have to do that. After RT was made register as a foreign agent here in the US after the 2016 election, YouTube did bring in a policy where if you go to even a BBC video now, there is a disclaimer box under that saying this is in some way funded by the state. Same with RT. Facebook, for all the steps and all the criticism that they've taken over the past 2 years, haven't brought in those sort of labeling requirements. So we asked Facebook, we asked them in the context of these pages, do you guys have any labeling policy, any plans for doing that? And we actually we asked the questions to Facebook on Wednesday, and they issued us with a response, which was basically sort of saying, well, we're contemplating doing something about labeling state-funded media.
So they're thinking about it. So it's the media, and in other cases, it's politicians that are alerting Facebook to these problems. I mean, here's a headline about something else this week. Adam Schiff writes to Facebook, says you're allowing a lot of horrible anti-vaccination information live on Facebook. And now Facebook says they are considering how to reduce the spread of anti-vaccine content. So whether it's these Russian-funded pages or anti-vax lies, it feels like Facebook's making it up as they go along.
Well, they've they're constantly telling us how many people they've hired, all the steps they've taken to, combat election meddling. But you're right. I mean, something like this, state-funded media, or something like vaccination, disinformation on the platform, this is something that's been going on for years.
It's been going on for years. And I'm glad the company's trying to do the right thing, but it does feel like they are trying to figure it out as they go along. Noe, thanks for being here. Great to see you. Full story is on CNN.com. And one reminder here, a programming note, Monday night, CNN is having its next town hall with a presidential contender. Amy Klobuchar will be on stage with Don Lemon in New Hampshire Monday, 10 p.m. Eastern Time here on CNN. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Let me know what you thought of the program today. Look me up on Facebook. I'm at Brian Stelter. Tweet me at Brian Stelter, and we'll see you back here next week.